So the MS is we're going to have to start the sugya from the bottom of the Gimel Amud Beis, because the sugya starts there with the last second to the last member of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, which are brought here, as Rashi mentioned to us, one after the other, although there's no kesher, simply because they are all questioned by Rav Kana. All these members of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav have a strong question from Rav Kana. That's how they start. So let's catch up back on Daf Gimel Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Shloishes lugin maim, shenofa lesoichon kortev shel dvash, shel yain, sorry. We have 3 lugin of maim, as we know, 3 lugin, midirabonon, once they fall into a mikveh, a kosher mikveh, they are passing the mikveh. But what happens is that a quart of shel yain, which is the smallest amount in halacha of wine, a tiny bit of wine falls into this water. Umaren kemar yain, the entire water turns to look like wine. V'noflu lamikveh zokt rav loy psaluhu. We don't passel the mikveh. Zokt Rashi loy psaluhu. Zil basar chazusa. Rav's yesod is that you follow the look of the water. The yain ain't a since I don't see water here, I see wine because it's all red, and wine is not poised to the mikveh. We're not passing the mikveh. Now here Rashi adds last words. He says, "Psul mikveh b'mayim she'uvin midarabanon." Rashi makes sure to mention that the whole psul of mayim she'uvin, in other words, obviously a mikveh made entirely for mayim she'uvin is possible with the rice. Here we're talking when 3 lugin fall into a mikveh and make it possible. That's a psul midarabanon. Why is Rashi mentioning it here? So you should explain, because this entire thing of looking at a drop of wine, turning the entire water into wine and could not consider it mayim she'uvin, rather wine, which is not possibly the mikveh, is a major chidush, and it doesn't really follow in halachas like broches. You don't make very kriyagofen on this water that just got colored with red, and any other halacha it doesn't follow this. So zil basar chazusa, the school of looking at the water as wine just because it's red, says Rashi, simply because this is a psul midirabanan, and Chachamim here will make to follow chazusa, to follow the look of the wine. This is the psak of Rav. Maski for Rav Kana. Here Rav Kana comes and asks a strong question. What's the difference between this case of wine coloring water and meitzeva, which is literally colored water? We have a mishnah, meitzeva poised in a samikveh b'shloishes lugin. If you have colored water and 3 lugin of that fall into the mikveh, it's passing the mikveh. It doesn't have the color of water. Water is see-through, and this is colored. We see that Rabbi Yossi didn't have an issue of passing the mikveh. So how could Rav go against Rabbi Yossi? And Rishonim explained this is not stam Rabbi Yossi. This is shit of Rabbi Yossi, obviously from the Gemara, from the Kana, we see that was taken the halach. So how do we deal with the discussion? Rabbi Yossi's halacha that colored water is passing the mikveh. And here, water that was colored by a drop of wine, Rav says, is not going to pass the mikveh. Omar leRav, so Rav answered Rav Kana, Hasam maya detziva mikri, hacha chamra meziga mikri. The difference is how people call the name that these liquids are given. If water is colored, we still call it colored water. But if wine falls into water and turns it into red, we will call it chamra miziga. We call it a diluted wine. It's mamish gubei kechulei water, but people nevertheless will see the wine there dominant and say this is diluted wine. What's the difference how people call it? So the Ritva explains that really this entire psul of the Rabbanon, and the Melech Chachamim have to look at how people call it to see and realize, will people mix and think water is passing, it's kosher or pasul? So things that people still call water, colored water, they say, okay, this is in the category of water, we keep the psul de rabbanan. But the moment people start calling it diluted wine, it changes this chazusa, the look is going to change also the way people call it. Then we're not worried anymore, they will confuse it with water, and we are making. Now here is the end of the kasha and the answer of Rav Kana. We have a clear answer why the views about colored water is pasul, and wine that gets colored is chamra mizik. But now the Mishnah that the Gemara is going to deal for a long time, for half a amud, with the etzem yisad of Rav of saying that zil basar chazusa, that if I have three full what's it called? 3 full lugin of mine, and they just got colored by an additional tiny bit of wine. Rav says we still are not going to pass in the mikveh because the color was mafkia, this 3 lugin of mine, from making the mikveh possible. So Rav, in other words, is using this chazusa, the color of the water, the kula, and by that he's saying that although I have 3 full lugin of mine, we are going to keep the mikveh kosher. Now, before we continue, instead of getting confused with the Gemara's back and forth, because the Gemara is going to have some back and forth here and some technicalities, let's make a hakdama klalis, a pashut lechesben, and see what's in front of us. So, bichlal, as we started mentioning, there are 2 factors when it comes to 3 lugin of man shuvin going into a mikveh. Number 1 is the amount. In other words, the amount that passes with the rabbanon is 3 lugin, and it has to be water. In other words, any other mashke that is not water, wine or cholov or any mashke in the world that is not water was not part of the tzim. That's number 1. So the quantity has to be l'chura 3 full lugin of water. That's number 1. The other thing is the mare, how the water looks like. Is it see-through like water, or does it look like any other mashke? Now, these 2 factors are going to come into display now in the Gemara and how the Gemara understands a machlokes tanur. It says the Gemara, we have Rav that here is mekel and says, I have 3 full lugin of mine. They got colored by an additional carton of wine in red. And Rav is mekel, he says it's not poison. We have a brayse that Rabbi spoke exactly about this case, and the brayse says that these 3 lugin of mine that got colored passed the mikveh. Says Rashi, which is exactly the case of Rav. They lowered down the mikveh to become possible. This is the lashon of the B'chia. So this is the kasha of the Gemara. I'll bring you a Mishnah where we find a machlokes tanoim, and the machlokes tanoim, says Rava, includes this case. In other words, we'll see now that the Mishnah has 2 cases. It's no question that there's one machlokes tanoim regarding the second case of the Mishnah, and Rava holds that there's also machlokes tanoim regarding the first case. And B'meila Rava says, what we just brought down, Rav seems to be arguing on the B'chia. Rav says it's not the place, and the B'chia says it is place. It says Rav, but this is really machlokes tanoim between Rabbanon and Rabbi Benuri. In this exact case, what happens if 3 full lugin of water get colored by an additional carton of wine? Is that going to be poisel or not? So we're going to see that Chachamim Takar Machmir like Rabbi, and only Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is mekel like Rav. This is how Rava interprets the machlokes tanoim. Zakti Gemara, the Tanan, we learned on Mishnah Shloshis with the Maim Chaser Karta. The Mishnah here talks about in a case where we are not having a full 3 lugin of wine. This is how Rav brings the Mishnah. Rav says the first case that Chachamim talk about is if I have 3 lugin missing a kartik. In other words, it's not full 3 lugin, so we don't have it again. We don't have the shiur. And what happens is shenafal l'seichen kartiv yain umarein temari yain. Then a kartiv wine falls into it, and now I have a 3 full lugin of water combined by a little bit of wine. Chachamim say, if I have, in other words, tarti dereyus, I have two chisronos here. Number 1, there wasn't 3 full lugin of water. Number 2, it got colored by wine, and the wine is completing the 3 lugin. So here Chachamim say, loip salu. Now, what do you understand from such a psak? If you ask these rabbanon, what happens if it was lechatchila 3 full lugin of water? So, then Chachamim would takri machno. Chachamim will tell you, there it's takri pois. In other words, what's Rav is seeing here? Chachamim are mekel when they're tarti l'reus. Number 1, the water is missing a kartiv of water, and it also got. This is the pashtus. Says the right of the Mishnah, the Mishnah, the chen gimel lugin mine chaser kartiv. And if I have 3 lugin of mine again missing the kartiv, shenafal l'seichen kartiv chala, a little bit of milk fell into it. Umarei and kemare mine, the color didn't change. Again, the nafal lamikveh, so here Chachamim are mechad something even more and say, even if the color did not change, the fact there was not lechatchila 3 lugin of water, there's only one reus of the shiur, even there Chachamim say leipsalu. So what do we have here? Mishnah the Chachamim tell us. First case, there are 2 reus. Number 1, missing the shiur. Number 2, the color was changed. They say leipsalu. Second chidush is, it was missing the shiur, the color is still color of water, it's not the leipsalu. This is the two psak of Chacham. Zogt Rashi, Chaser Kortiv, Garsinon Hacha Bereisha B'Seif. Rashi makes it clear in both cases, Sai of the wine and Sai of the Chalav. In both cases, there was a Kortiv missing of water in the Chatri. So in the first case, Leib Shalu Zogt Rashi Mishum Bechasu Kortiv. Why? So right away, Sashi says the problem here is the sheep. What's Pshat? Avol Ihavu Meikara Shleishes Lugin Shleimin, the Nafal Eseichim Kortiv Yain, Umarein Kemare Yain Salu. Rashi says, again, what we said before, if Chachamim needed to speak in a case of 2 reuses, what happens if I'm missing 1 reus? In other words, I do have 3 full lugin of water, lechatchila. I don't care anymore if the wine colored the water. And the Mele says Rashi, according to the Rav's Mahalach, so here we have the first Tanakam. Chachamim here are saying that in the case of Rav, where if, in other words, they're not saying it clearly, but that's the remnants. Why are they not poisel? Because it's missing lechatchila kar. But if it would have been a full 3 lugin of wine, then the fact they got colored with wine, I don't care. It's still poisel the mikveh, and that's exactly what Abchia said. It's poisel the mikveh. Second case is Rashi leipsal. Why in the case where the color of the water stayed the same leipsal? So here again, time of the sefer nami mishum the chassid kartevat. Here basically the Chachamim are saying very strongly that the only thing I look at is the shiur. And here Rashi obviously has a little bit of a shlerik. If the only thing you're trying to tell me is the shiur is what counts, why do you break off the Mishnah in 2 cases? One case where it gets colored and one case it doesn't. So here Rashi gives the answer. Now it says, the gabi yain nami habi motzim l'mishin ki agav l'bereish. Wine would have also been a case where if I tell you it looks like water, I still am going to tell you leipsalu. In other words, it's not pshat I really need tarti dereis. I really need both the water not to look like wine and the water to be fully 3 lugin. No, the only thing Chachamim really care about is the shiur. As we see from the Sefer where Chachamim say, even if it looks like water, leipsalu because it was missing lechatchila 3 lugin. So according to Rava, the only yisod Chachamim are caring about is the fact that the shiur needs to be 3 lugin lechatchila. Whether it's colored or not colored, I don't care. So that's what Rashi's question. So why don't you just teach it all the way at the beginning this way? Hachi, this is how you should say. Shloishes lugin nine chaser kartev. Shenafal esechem kartev yain oy chalav. Ben shemaren kemare mayin, ben shemaren kemare yain. Like Salum, Chachamim should have said, I don't passel as long as there was no 3 lugin of water. And the moment there will be 3 lugin of water, even if it gets colored, Chachamim will say, I am passel. So why Rashi? In other words, Rashi's question is, why are you mechalik and confusing me with mare mayin, ein mare yain? Who cares? You saw at the end, we're going to find out, we're realizing that it's all about the shiur. And says Rashi, we just wanted to teach practical cases. And the fact is, 1 little drop of wine will color the water. But the milk usually doesn't have an effect of coloring the water. So the Maisa here with a comment that is exactly the shita of Chia, and Chia says like this: if I have 3 full lugin of wine, they are going to pass the mikveh no matter what color they have. The only case I'm not going to pass on the mikveh is if lechatchila the 3 lugin of mine were missing and it got completed with another type of mashta. Comes Rabbi Ben Nuri back to the Gemara. I argue in both cases. We only look at the mara. You are only looking at the shiur. I only look at the mara. Says Rashi, hakalol lechachar amare. The gabi yain afilu havu meikara shleishes lugin shleimin. Even the maren kemare yain leipsalu. Even if lechatchila says the key, you would have had 3 lugin of water, which you Chachamim implied that at the moment I have 3 full lugin of water, I don't care about the look of wine, and it's still possible. Says Rabbi no, leipsalu. The Rav Kava says, this is what I was saying. Rav has Rabbi Ben Nuri in his opinion. The Gavi Cholav Afagav Meikar Chaser Karter Habu Mashli the Cholav. Here the Rabbi Ben Nuri says, and I'll argue also the second piece, where you are Meikar, and say that that water that looks like water and got completed with milk, I am not going to pass it because it's missing the shiur. Says the Bechon Benuri again, I don't care about the shiur. If there is 3 lugin now and it looks like water, the chalav is mashlim the shiur. So here the Bechon Benuri and Chachamim basically having a very extreme machlokes according to Rava. One says it all depends on the shiur. The other one says it all depends on the mar. So let's make a clarity again. 2 cases where they don't argue is where there's part of the Yosef Chachamim are missing a shiur and there's no Mare Yain. The Bechon Benuri Chachamim agree that it's not going to pass. Both agree also that if there is 3 full lugin of water and milk falls in and it doesn't color anything, it's going to pass. What is the argument about? 2 cases. Number 1, if the water is colored and there was lechatchila 3 lugin of water, and that's exactly what Rav and Abchir were arguing about. Rav is going to be mekel, and that's what Chachamim are saying. That's what Rabbi Benuri is saying, and Chachamim are going to be machmir because the look I don't care. If Papa had a problem, lechatchila he wasn't sure what's the girsa in the Mishnah, and basically what if Papa is going to tell us is that lav dafke Chachamim are being so machmir like we thought lechatchila. We lechatchila are thinking, Chachamim are saying, look, the moment there's a shiur lechatchila of shloishes lugin mayim, I am going to be passing the mikveh no matter the look. The Papa has a different gist. The boy of Papa, Rav, Toni, Chaser, Kortev, Bereisha. Does Rav put really the words Chaser, Kortev in the beginning of the Mishnah? In other words, is the beginning of the Mishnah really a case where we're missing the shiur? Aval shloisha lugin letanakam mepasli. But in other words, if there's going to be 3 lugin of water lechatchila, so then Chachamim will take a pass in it, although the look of the water is like wine. The also Rabbi Yochanan is coming to argue on this reisha as well and saying you Chachamim are going to be passing a mikveh, although the water looks like wine, and I am going to be machshir the mikveh. This is one option. And this is exactly what Rava just said. The Papa says maybe Takir Rava is right. And the Girsa in the Mishnah is Chaser Kartet Bereisha. And Chachamim and Rabbi Benuri are arguing what happens if a full 3 lugin of water gets colored with wine. Will it be okay like Chachamim said, like Rabbi Benuri said, because the wine is the dominant, the color is the dominant? Or will I say I look at the shiur, which is what Chachamim said? Ideal mind here, the Papa twists it and says, no. Rav Toni Chaser Kartev Bereisha. Maybe Rav takes out the words Chaser Kartev Bereisha. In other words, the first case in the Mishnah is talking about a full shiur of 3 lugin. And what are Chachamim, in other words, coming out to say? Exactly what Rav said. Chachamim are going to be saying in the reisha of the Mishnah that the 3 full lugin of water get colored by an additional kartev of wine. Leipsalu. This is what Tanakam is going to be saying. And what's Rabbi Yochanan Benuri arguing about? On the last case only. Chachamim say, if there was no shiur of water lechatchila, then it's not poisel. Rabbi Yochanan Benuri says, no, if the water looks like water, I don't care if the shiur was fulfilled by a kartev of chalv. Let's see inside the Gemara. In Dilma, Rav leitani chaser kartev bereish. Rabbi Yochanan Benuri kipali gaseifa hu detal. The only argument between Chachamim and Rabbanon and Rabbi Yochanan Benuri is only on the seifa. But the reisha, Rav de Omer, everybody agrees with Rav that the fact that the wine colors even a full shiur of shleishes lugin mayim is going to be a problem. In other words, the water is not going to be passing anymore. So let's be misakid here. We have 2 options. We have 2 dinim. Okay, we have 2 dinim again. There's the shiur and then there's the mar. Rav and Abchir are arguing what happens if I have the shiur. I don't have the lechatchila, there were 3 shleishes lugin wine, and they got colored with wine. So my problem is now the look. The shiur is there, but the wine is coloring with red. This is the argument. Now we're trying to understand if Rab and Abchir are arguing the same machlokes of Tanakam and Rabbi Benuri, or the whole Mishnah, Sai Chacham and Sai Rabbi Benuri agrees with Rab that we're mekel, and the fact that wine got colored is going to be a kul. So how do we figure out, how do we see this in the Mishnah? So let's say the things that everybody agrees on. There's one machlokes between Chacham and Rabbi Benuri everybody agrees on. And that's the case where I don't have a shiur of 3 lugin of water. In other words, I'm missing the shiur, which is again not the case that Abchir and Rav spoke about. I'm missing the shiur, and the water looks like water, but it got completed with milk. In other words, it was missing a shiur of water. The mat is not a problem. The mat is water, but the shiur was not water. So here Chachamim and Rabbi Chananuri argue. Chachamim say, I need a sheet of water. Rabbi Chananuri is machmir, and he says, no, I don't care. I don't need a sheet of water. As long as the look looks like water. If I have now 3 lugin, the toil mamish, even though it was completed by Chalav, I'm machmir, and this is shloishes lugin ma'imshim. So this is a machlokes Chachamim and Rabbi Chananuri argue for sure, and that has nothing to do with Rav and Rabbi. This is basically arguing, could another mashke be mashling the shiur of shloishes? This is the machlokes Chachamim and Rabbi Chananuri, and we'll leave that on the side. That's for sure happening in this mission, and that's about it. What is happening between Priya and Rav, and that's happening now? The question is, who's holding like them and who's not? Rabbi Chananuri is for sure saying, which means that in the case of Rav, I'm for sure going to say, I don't hassle the mikveh, which is exactly what Rav said. If I mean that even if I have a shiur of shloshis lugin mayim, if it looks like wine, I don't consider the shloshis lugin mayim shuvin. The mikveh is kosher, just like Rav said. So Rabbi Chananuri is for sure like that. What's Chachamim's opinion? Oh, so Chachamim's opinion, it depends. If I mention in Chachamim the word chaser kartev, in other words, this is not the case Rav and Rabbi Chananuri were discussing. Rather, it's a case where we're missing a shiur. So what are Chachamim basically saying? The reason why I'm making here is not like Rav and Rabbi Chananuri are saying because the look of the wine is take machshir, this whole shloshis lugin. No, the reason why I'm making here is because chaser kartev. It's because of the shiur is missing. If the shiur would not be missing, I would be machmir like the Priya against Rav, and I would say that this shloshis lugin is placed in the mikveh. This is if you keep the words inside chaser kartev. In other words, the kula of Chachamim in the Reisha, the reason why they're machshir the mikveh is not because of Rav reasons, rather because of the shiur. But if I take out the words chaser kartev, which is what the Rav Papa is suggesting, and we're going to see soon also that Yosef learned it this way. If you take out the words in the chaser kartev at the beginning of the Mishnah, so what's the Mishnah is starting with? The classical case of Rav and Priya, this machlokes. The Mishnah is starting with a case where we have 3 full lugin of water, a drop of wine colored, an additional kartev of wine colored the water, and now Chachamim, what are they saying? Exactly like that against the Priya. So this is what's happening. Rav Papa was suggesting basically that maybe Rav's case is not in the subject of machlokes Rabbi Chananuri and Chacham. Rav's case, both Chachamim and Rabbi Chananuri both agree that the water colored by wine is not placed in the mikveh. That's what Rav Papa suggested. Rava learned, however, no, that we keep the word chaser kartev in the Mishnah in the Reisha. Rabbi Chananuri and Chachamim were arguing also about the case of Rav and the Priya's argument. What happens if a full shiur of water gets colored by wine? I hope this is clear enough. Harav, I hope what you Makkos say that fine. Again, weiter. So now we have a backup, basically an answer. Rav for sure has a
It's open for questions. Whoever wants to. It's open for questions if the other participants want to open their mic.
I have to actually go through a few Rashis. But everybody else is clear. Whatever. Look, when there's no questions, it's you that it's either because everything is clear, because nothing is clear. Fine. Zogt Rashi, sorry, what's the Gemara's question? Rashi explains, we're asking, why are you so sure that Rav is only going to be having Rabbi Chananuri behind him? L'chura that Papa was in doubt, and it might be that Rav is also agreed by Chacham. By Rav Papa, Rav de Amar Leilei Psalu, Heichi Tani, how did he learn this Mishnah? Mi Tani Chaser Kartev Bereisha. Did he learn the words Chaser Kartev in the beginning of the Mishnah? Was this a case missing the 3 lugin, and therefore it comes out that Chachamim are saying that Yehavu Shleim Pasu the Loike Rav? Or Chachamim really arguing when Rav is saying if there was 3 lugin fully, then they are going to be poisel the mikveh. I don't care about the wine coloring it, and this is against Rav. This is one option, which is what Rava offered. But if Papa is suggesting maybe Rav Leitani Bereisha Chaser Kartev, he never put in the words Chaser Kartev Bereisha of the Mishnah. The Amr Lenisa Derila, he don't care about. Why? The Rabbanon Tarvayu Bo Shiur of Chazusa. Chachamim take need to pass a mikveh. They both need that the Shiur lechatchila is 3 lugin of water. but also that the chazusa, which is exactly what I've said, the Rav Damar Kidivre HaKoil, the Kuli Almo Mi Chazusa Mi Azboin. The difference between a Chacham and Rabbi Yochanan is only what happens if I'm missing the shiur and I have the look of water, which Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is machmin and says, I don't care about the shiur. If the milk is coloring, if the milk is completing the shiur, I'm still going to be possible. But that's a subject Rav did not touch at all. Rav did not discuss what's the gather of shiur. Do you need a shiur or not? Rav discussed the chazusa, and here Chachamim and Rav and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri agree with Rav that the color of wine does not affect. It affects the psul, and therefore the mikveh is still kosher. The psul of shlish lugim ma'im shuvin doesn't apply once it gets colored. Zog the Gemara, what's the answer? Enochinami Rav Papa miboile Rava pshitolei. Rava Take had only one option. It was obvious by him that Rav learned the words chassid in the Mishnah, and Rav was following Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. It's only Rav Papa that came up with a chidush and said maybe Rav wasn't even goydes the words chassid kartiv in the Reisha, and everybody Saitan comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri agreed with it. Zok Rashi Rav pshitolei the Rav tani chassid kartiv b'Reisha the loy boy tani kame el shiura. Rav learned himself, knows that Tanakame argues on him, and the only thing he cares about is shiur. The Rav the kapi nami achazusa Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri amra lim say. Rav cares also about chazusa. He cares about this just because he follows the Yochanan ben Nuri. Now, the hoy that the words nami achazusa are a little bit funny because the Yochanan ben Nuri, as we saw, doesn't care also about chazusa. He cares only about chazusa. If you're missing a shiur of shleishus lugin mayim and it's completed by milk, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is going to be still machmir and say this is shleishus lugin mayim shuvin. So I'm not sure if Rav will take the chumrah of the kula, in other words, of both chachamim, and say if there's no shiur lechatchila, it's not koisel, and chazusa Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri also, or maybe namya chazusa is just a way of saying it. Fine. I never heard this shmur. What shmur is of Rashi? I'm Rabbi ZS Shpringer, Talmidish Rabbi Yehuda Ami. I'm the Talmid of Rabbi Yehuda who said this memory in the name of God. I never heard such a thing ever from Rabbi Yehuda Marav. So back in the Gemara, you did teach us this memory, and not just that, you also found to us it's necessary to explain how Rav learned this Mishnah, and Yitaka learned like the Papa. The Pshitus, that what? The Rav learned in the beginning of the Mishnah, there's no words Chaser Kartiv. In other words, the beginning of the Mishnah is speaking clearly about the case of Rav, and Chachamim are clearly saying Kartiv Yain is not going to be, if there's a Kartiv Yain additional falling into water, coloring it with wine, it will not be possible in the mikveh. The Rabbi Yochanan is Seifa Palig, and the only argument between Chachamim and Rabbi Yochanan is the Seifa where it comes to the water missing and completed by milk. You always basically the Rabbi is reminding Rabbi Yosef, not just did you teach us this, but you also told us that Rav really holds like Divrei HaKoil because he's not goyis. The words Chassid Karter and Tanakam is basically saying what Rav said. This is a Gemara that in the Dorim talks about the fact that Yosef at some point, Yosef forgot his entire Talmud, and Abai would come to him and remind him, and then Yosef would remember. The thing is that it's interesting. Once we have gives in the Mishnah according to Rav that is clearly saying what Rav said, the question now should be Tanoi, like, well, why are you teaching us things that the Divrei HaKoil of the Mishnah is what we're saying? And this is the clear case in the beginning of the Mishnah. So Muslim Zagan, that as we see, the Gifs and the Reisha is very not clear. And the Chachamim, the Abiron that are holding the Rav is Divrei HaKoil are really telling us that Rav came to teach us this. Rav came to teach us Tani Rav. Rav is telling us this is how the Mishnah should be read. When he said the case that it's, and he said Loy Psalu, he's telling us this is the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah should be taken out the words Chassid Karter, and Chachamim are saying my case of 3 lugin that are fully water, get colored by wine, and the wine takes it away from being poisel, because as linon basar chazus, so we follow the look of the water. Ad kan, this case of Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Here we have a different case that is also related to kashas and psul of shleishes lugin, but not exactly the case we spoke about before. There is a din that says that 3 lugin maim she'uvin, if you take a shower with 3 lugin maim she'uvin, they pour on you, or you go into them, you become pasul l'truma. Now, here we have a case where 3 lugin maim she'uvin fall into the ocean, and you throw yourself right straight into the 3 lugin maim she'uvin. What is the din? Are you tamei or not? So let's understand that we're talking about a person that is tamei regardless. He's coming from another tumah. He's trying to go into the mikveh, and he goes into these 3 lugin maim she'uvin that dropped into the ocean. So it's an interesting case, but this is the case. Somebody good amarav. Chavis le'yamayim shenachla liyam hagodu hatoivil sham le'yalsa litvi. You have a whole bucket of water that fell into the yam hagodu, and now you drop following right after the chavis, and you go in that water, that spot. We're worried that the 3 lugin should not be in one place. In other words, we're worried that the 3 lugin will be in one place, and you just went into a 3 lugin of water, which that itself makes you possible to. Zogt Rashi. We missed the last Rashi on the previous sugi. You told us that memre. And this is probably what we're saying before. Rav Take took out the words chasek in the first case of the Mishnah and his words on the Divraka. Fine. What's this case? He was toivel ba'oisei mocking, so they also need to. Why not? Maybe the entire water that just got into the ocean is in one place. So now what's pshat echad min hapois min hatruma? This guy is trying to do a tefillah because obviously he's coming from something else. He's going into something that midirabanan is poiseles hatruma. In other words, it's passing you from eating truma, and he's also going to make a piece of truma tamei. So this psul makes you not able to really leave the previous truma. This is what some Mefarshim learn it. Other people say no, it doesn't mean that we also make tefillah from the first tumah. It means that he got maybe rid of the previous tumah, but now he has another issue, which is this psul truma because he got into 3 lugin of maim she'uvin. Zogt Rashi yefshel shleishes lugin chulu. There used to be words in the Mishnah that it wasn't the words of the member of Rav were not chayshina. The words were efshel. So Rashi legarsi. To say that is like saying it's impossible that the 3 lugin are not in one spot. Says Rashi, sure it's possible, it's in the middle of the ocean. It's a chashash. They say for the we're going to see at the end of this sugya that it's only a chashash. Reason why the Gemara is suggesting basically, but Rashi takes it as a real thing. The reason why this person is still tamei, although it's just a chashash, maybe the 3 lugin are in one place, says Rashi, because he has a cheskas tumei was already tamei until now. So from this Rashi proves that it's not all efshel, it's not that it's obviously there, it's just a chashash, and we're having an issue because the chazaka here is cheskas tumei. The Gemara is medayken of Yehuda Marav, that he spoke in the case that when the water went into the ocean. But if it would have been a river, then you have a clear mitzias that the river keeps on floating and the water is for sure not staying in the same spot. Tanin Namehochi, you have the same exact price. Lechura, Chavis leya yain shenofel leyamagodu, hatoivel sham le'alsa litvila, chayshina l'shleisha lugin she'uvin shle'yehu b'makamech. So here we're talking about a chavis leya yain. The price is not talking about water, but the problem is the same problem. The problem is that yain is not kosher l'tvila. That's why, since we're choishes that the wine didn't mix in the water of the ocean, you go in there, you didn't go into kosher mikveh, just like we're choishes that the water of 3 lugin maim she'uvin are not going to be mixing in the ocean easily. So in other words, the yisod from this brayso is the chashash, is the mitzias. The specific psul, I also was choishes lugin maim she'uvin. Here, it's yain, which is in other words not poisel mitzad yain. It's just not a mikveh at all. Right? He says a general title. mashkin, any type of drink, water or wine. That they stay in this place because we see chavis shel yain gasim in the brayse. The sefte here it changes from water to wine according to Rashi, and this is the raya the Tanit Namiach. Then the brayse continues and says, if a piece of truma falls into this place of the yain, that also will become tummy. What's the case? It's a kikor shel truma that falls into wine doesn't get tummy, obviously. Wine is not metame, the ocean is not metame, why should it become tummy? Elomai, says Rashi. This is the following the first case. This person went into the water, into the wine that was in the middle of the ocean, and he left. Then a piece of truma fell in there. Zokt Rashi told me why. Not just was the wine in the same place before he went to the mikveh. This guy went inside the mikveh, made shayt list. He left the wine, and where choshesh still the wine is sitting in the same spot in the Yam HaGadol. And what happens now? The wine became tamei when this tamei person went into it. Now the wine that is tamei is metamediki. So what happens is the wine is there. A tamei person goes into it. Not just is he not nitar because he wasn't toivel in the ocean. He makes the wine tamei, and then a piece of truma falls into it, and the wine is now metamei, the truma. Why is the Bryce saying the words v'chein? Keilu, we're coming to add a chashash, to add a chidush. Dr. Rashi, my v'chein pshita. Even the chayish to the shema yain oimedin koimois ikolemecha shnit matika. If the Yesod Mitzvah says the wine is the same place, and the dinim are a goof tummy is metame wine and wine is metame truma, this is a pashut chesed we could make ourselves. Zog the Gemara no big chidush. Mahu the teimo hosam uki gavra chazkei. And it's such a big Kamash Malon that it's hard to understand how is this Kamash Malon gonna hold. Dr. Ashimau the thing. Afal Gab, I would have thought that there's a major difference between a person going into this wine and the piece of truma going into this wine. Why? The Amisot says actually, let's make it clear. This is a big chasha, it's a big suffix. If take the wine is still in the same place or not. Now, that makes sense to say the person didn't manage to do a proper tefillah because uki gavra chazak. The person has to be placed back on his previous chazak. Who he was tummy. You're trying to take him out of the chazak of tummy, which was for sure tummy. Through what? Through tvila suffix, because maybe it wasn't bichal toiv, he went into wine. So al tataran and suffix, that makes sense. But the hacha uke truma chazaka, the truma was a kasher, a toirdike piece of truma. The hibecheses the kaima. So why would you be metame the piece of truma? Because maybe the wine is in the same exact place, and the piece of truma became tummy from the wine. Komashma, this is the chiddush of the Bryce, that no, although the kikar truma has a chazaka, this chashash that there is wine being koiloi is enough for me to be metamed the piece of truma. It's not shvet to understand, and Rashi before used this havamina to prove that it's just a chashash. And Rashi obviously did not take the Kamash Malon to tell us the Kamash Malon is saying that the Metzias is, we know for sure the wine is in the exact same place. So the Kamash Malon is more a din of in the dinim, in the chumre of chachamim with this piece of truma. So this last din of Rav is brought also in a Mishnah, in a Brayse, and the din is basically there were choshesh liquids that fall into the ocean, staying in the same place. So it's a 3 lugin of mayim. The problem will be the 3 lugin of mayim being metam and truma. If it's wine, the problem is that this is in ganz nishke mikveh, and the person wasn't toivel at all. And Hashem Lochein, we're choshesh further, and we're metam even something that doesn't have a cheskas truma, like the kikar shel truma falling into this supposedly Talmudic wine from the person that was toivel before him. Any questions? Fine. Gehen weiter with it.